mentioned to begin with, this has those letters up there, but it's of album length. I think everyone had the same experience of hearing Spoilers, Arcade Fire's best work and their debut album, of feeling the necessity to scoop up anything else they'd ever produced. And at that time that was here, and it's kind of, what exactly did you expect? Yeah, it's more of the same vibe, but it's no more of the same quality. I think there's not really anything you'd miss on this one. There's an argument for one track, but then they re-recorded it in a much better way later. So just allow this piece to be an optional extra you get around to if you ever want to get around to it. Because now it's time for fuck's sake, this is so good. I know I'm of the right age and complexion to have been swept up in the wave of this one. And retroactively it can feel like the Arcade Fire are a bit cringe-inducing, but kind of that's the point. It's a creative fearlessness and a refusal to be anything but sincere and passionate. And at the time their perspective was brand new for music, and their format of just having way too many members was a pretty new thing, and they're better than the Polyphonic Spree. Those attributes make the whole thing a storm, a snowstorm, there you go, of guileless youth. Guileless but still skeptical, kind of constructing their own mythology from their own tragedy and trauma. Things that could often be musical weaknesses, the yelping, the messiness of the music, come out here as very particular highlights. They make an emphatic music, yelling, bent at the hip, delivering. It's monumental, it's a singular wonder. That doesn't mean there's nothing else in their discography worth hearing, but maybe it means this is the one you totally need to. And then you'll go on and find some more. When you do that, you'll find this one, which is a very standard means of following up an epic debut, trying to maintain the same sound without necessarily having the narrative, trying to prove a bit more diversity to their excellence, and really only succeeding a bit. It's awkward that I now have to fault them for having made something so excellent and continuing to make things that don't quite have that descriptor, because this is still musically very solid, just not remarkable enough. They bounced back, understandably, readjusting to tell a much bigger story again. Not The Funeral is a lengthy album, it just achieves being epic without needing the crutches of prog, and this time they thought they'd try it with the crutches of prog, which does work, it just now asks patience of you. Actually, there's a song that's specifically about, like, the virtue of waiting for something, and then there's a sprawling, boring track, and then there's the best track right at the end. Like, if patience is a virtue, I'm bored of being patient at this point, and I don't need it within entertainment. Get to the chorus. Allowing for that, they've recaptured a good few of the strengths of Funeral. There, they were a gang of feral kids telling tales at a campfire. Here, they've reached the tedium of adulthood, and they demonstrate a means of putting up with that. There's good material throughout this, but it's also spread wide a little, and their musical discipline, or lack thereof, has now tamed into a more standard 4/4 rock, which makes for less exciting and less essential music. That's a flaw in the format of criticism. When you make something so good, I'm gonna sound negative about anything else. But maybe I'm just getting my practice in sounding negative for this one. I took a while to get around to this. I think I heard the singles upon initial release, and kind of liked the singles, but kind of felt something was off about it in general. Then later on I got over myself and gave the whole album a try, and maybe I shouldn't have got over myself. There's a massive format flaw to this in that it's printed on 2 discs, but it really doesn't justify doing that. The duration of the contents is barely beyond the length of 1 CD, especially when you consider just how much time filler is on it. I think if they'd disciplined it down to 1 lengthy CD, it could have been a more successful product. They could have exercised some quality control and not just be wasting the listener's time. And I don't just mean the listeners who are stuck in the CD age and have to change the disc. Because there's some stuff on here that really works, but it's spread even thinner. Songs are now relying more on duration than dynamics to try and be epic, and it just doesn't work. Somehow there's both way too much on here and still not enough. There's not all that many tracks. tracks. And when you distill it down to the worthwhile ones, it would still be a slight album. Sprawling and slight, no thanks. They've made a horrible decision of having 2 attempts at reggae right next to each other. There's nothing inherently bad about reggae. I don't quite see what they're not managing to do within it. It just happens to sound horrible, and they didn't learn that lesson enough to cut either of those tracks, or at least split them up. They interrupt an otherwise impressive run on the first disc, and then a lot of the second disc is wasted on bad ideas. Lyrical themes shouldn't have to be definitive of music, but they're easier to describe. I think their focus on existing mythology undermines what was once their strength in making up mythology. Like, it's mythical either way, just be creative. And that song about the degradation of women that kind of blames men and boys for it and points out that he's not that kind of man or boy, already came across as very cack-handed even before what we now know about Win Butler. In the Arcade Fire's creative refusal to be embarrassed about anything, which has brought some of the absolute highlights of their career, here's some missteps. And yet, still some highlights, just not presented in the right format. Maybe if I strictly had to only ever use CDs, this would go at the bottom because of how annoying its format is. But in total content and allowing for a skip button, it does outdo that EP.
This cassette release counts as eligible and accompanies some documentary that glorifies that attempt at an album. This arguably is such bonus tracks. A couple of the tracks would uplift the tedium of the album if swapped in. They'd undo its genre, but that'd be for the better. Otherwise, they're still stuck in the pastiche, a music that feels insincere when it was sincerity we followed the Arcade Fire for. Now they've worn out that trick. As a listener, I feel I can only demand the unreasonable. It's unfair to ask this one to be ranked, as it wasn't really released with that intent, but it does outdo the introductory EP with some shining moments among the cutting room floor.
Again, upon release of this one, I'd lost focus on them and I caught up later. I know they were getting excruciating with publicity stunts, and they all come across as faceplants because of what their fandom actually love in the band, which comes from when they were very green. Now, that's not what the band love about themselves. Here's a wildly inconsistent piece with some that really match up to Funeral standard and quite a few that are nearly the opposite. Again, there's 2 cringe reggae pieces in a row that really don't work, and when they're followed by another couple of tracks that don't work, that's a really sour middle of the album, but it picks up a lot at the start and the end.
It could be embarrassing to write songs lamenting the progress of technology, but come on, they sang Black Mirror, what did you expect? I actually feel Arcade Fire's blunt idealism works very well on this subject. It's a relevant and timely thing to say, even if they're saying it with the obviousness of a political band from the 80s, and it's the tracks where they deviate from this that don't work.
The stuffing on Reflector kind of made for a wasted hour. Here we've still got some awful sound, but it's just not as excruciating to get past it. And at the start and the end, I adore what they're going for, and it really puts it among their best, but you've got to account for the badness of the bad parts. There are more releases I don't have CD copies of. Let's go over to those.
Okay, forgive me for not watching a film. If we have to take this seriously as an album independently, it doesn't stand up at all, because it's not really intended that way. I don't take to background music. I'm over here in the foreground where it doesn't compare. Just the kind of stuff you can make with a few piano keys in an afternoon. Feels like the band name being on this is a bit fake. In further pronouns, I didn't pick up the new one yet, but I found futuristic means of accessing its entire sound. They're still banking on suspense and release, on space and curiosity and prog, and 5-track titles across the whole thing, and they're still stuck between dance music and good music. This wastes a lot less time than Reflector, but it's got less to enjoy on it too. You wait around for the tracks to take flight, then sometimes it's a tedious, cliche kind of flight. The skip button would take you to the good tracks on the last few albums, here it would take you to the end. I'm brought to question what I really want from them, whether anything they could release could be satisfactory, because I can still listen to Funeral, and this band can separately carry on making music and propositioning fans. They remain earnest and do both consistency and variety, though maybe too separately. Nothing they've sung since getting onto the plinth can compare with the reason they got up there, but the glimpse glimpses of acoustic instruments here suggest they're one path back to humility. I'll believe in them when they earn it.